the key is like people only use head cheese now as sandwich spreading or slices of lunch meat. It actually wasn't supposed to be used for that purpose. It was supposed to, dry it out as much as you could dry it out so the fat itself gave away all the stuff to the meat, and then you'd cut it and you'd make it into huge cubes and you'd add it to soup, and it'd be like the consistency of tofu.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
And it could stay good for decades if you did it right. Decades. Yeah. So it's not doesn't matter if it came from snout to tail, as long as it went into head cheese. A decade later, you could still eat it. Mold wouldn't grow on it. Nothing.
Hey, it's like, our modern society. We're talking about how lots of characteristics have been lost due to technology. But I'm not going to be complaining about fridge and stuff like that.
Right.
To be able to preserve food, because I can see why that would be appreciated, because the longevity is a big thing.
Yeah, and when you learn to use every part of the animal that you were slaughtering, because you lived by the animal, there weren't grocery stores.
Yeah.
Even down to the bones that went into soup were planned. The marrow was eaten, so on and so forth. So
commodity,
right?
I know.
So there were recipes of head cheese that would use, let's say they were slaughtering a cow, because a cow could get a lot of marrow, and they would use the undesirable parts of the cow, the stringy pieces, the excess fats with hunks of meat stuck in between it, so the just the crappiest of parts. And it would all be put into one big hunk, and then they'd flour it in marrow. So like the marrow would be all the stuff, and then they'd compress it as hard as they could compress it, and then they'd steam cook it for 10, 12 hours, and then they could just cover it in salt, like a tremendous amount of salt.
Yeah.
And that would stay good for 10 years. 10 years.
Wow.
Just had that wisdom on understanding how to preserve it in that way. It was just
and then the marrow, right? The marrow, when it mix with the salt, it would make a coating on the surface, like a different kind of coating, and that would hold high volumes of minerals and nutrients. So when they went to go, break it up and put it into whatever they were going to put it, it just literally was liquefied, minerals that you needed.
Nutrition, yeah.
Pure nutrition, yeah.
But it's just they wouldn't have known what was in it. It's just it made them feel good, I like that. So, instinctive knowledge of it gives you life,
Right. So another thing is hoof stew. So hoof, when known right, can make glue, or at certain areas before it's glue, it's food. So if you overcook it, it's glue. If you undercook it, it's food. Okay? And you had a choice right away if you were going to eat that or not. And that's that seasonal things. Well, people would gorge on that stuff. This is why a lot of people who become vegetarians right away have a lot of immediate issues pop up to them, because they need to, in the old days when you were vegetarian, you would gorge on whatever's there. And then when people started eating meat, they were able to gorge on whatever they were slaughtering regularly and gain weight and energies faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was more purpose to the life expression rather than
Exactly.
It was survival in the reality what resources you had.
What you had, quite literally, yes.
Yeah, you had to adapt to what the environment was offering you. Because there wasn't mass transportation either of food, because there was no such thing as preservation.
No refrigeration. No refrigeration.
Yeah.
Right there, everything had to be floating in salt and vinegar. Vinegar was your savior of food. You could let it last 2 extra days. And you didn't have, things like we have today, the preservatives to keep ketchup good. You didn't get ketchup.
Yeah. Yeah, it's phenomenal how life has improved on so many levels that we just take it for granted.
Right. So if you look at portion size of today to portion size of 1900, so the portion size were here in the States when triple sized in the mid 90s, when GMO food really became everywhere. But in the 1900s, portion sizes were gigantic, but they didn't have, let's just say, the right refrigeration until the 20s, or the mid 20s is when refrigeration kind of really made it around the world. At least refrigeration for restaurants. So the restaurants would support their people could take the excess bad stuff home. That created a whole industry of people that used the pieces parts. This is throughout history. You always have the people that take the scraps home.
Yeah.
And the scrap-based foods, which were people learned how to preserve, smoke, whatever they were doing to make it last longer.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have those skills, you had to buy it off of someone or trade for it.
Wow, true.
That's right. You didn't know how to smoke. You didn't know how to slaughter your own thing, right? To save all the stuff. All that stuff goes bad quick if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't just lop a piece of meat off and stick it on the grill and then leave it there dead.
Yeah. It was a lot more complex, that's for sure.
Right.
Whole new meaning to the doggy bag.
So portion size, come back to that, people would take that home. It's i.e. the doggy bag or their leftovers bag, whatever you want to call it. But they had 4, 5, and 9,000 calorie meals for breakfast. Lunch, because they did physical labor, could be 15 to 20,000 calories because of the amount of butter they would put in.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. And then dinners that could exceed 50,000 calories because of the oil, grease, fat, etc., butter.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you're right, like the work was different. Absolutely.
Correct.
Life was a lot harder on so many levels. Like washing your own clothes.
Yeah.
Walking everywhere, riding a horse.
Well, most people didn't have a horse.
No.
Because having a horse meant a lot more work. Like if you wanted that horse to take you to the city, you had to train its ass and make it happy or beat it. So okay, two choices.
Wow, though, when you think about it.
Mm-hmm. And then, put people in the cities and they can't, there's no open range food. All they've got to do is fend for themselves, whichever the city-based jobs are. At least out in nature, you can learn some of the things that can feed you. And if you have to be nomadic, you have to be nomadic. Follow the rivers, follow the ducks.
Well, I mean, in my city, there was a lot of gardens. As a lot of the suburbs now used to be gardens.
Right.
And, vegetable gardens and specific food gardens for feeding the populace. And most cities would have been like that as well, I guess.
Right. So because modern industry took over big agriculture and farming, the way it used to be, there were a series of farms that were partially owned by the town or the city, and they would put a fairgrounds there. And what that would mean is everyone would come and harvest off to the main grounds, and then they'd have a bazaar, and they'd set the price. So people from other places would travel 2, 3, 4, or 5 days to bring whatever stuff to their market or bazaar.
Yeah.
And that's pretty common. You can see throughout history. And once they took the actual crops that the city was sharecropping with in the local areas, they took that out of the city. The city couldn't be self-sufficient.
Yeah.
So, if you look at the potato famine, like in Ireland, they lived off of basically 20 foot by 90 foot of potatoes, could feed a family of 10 for a year, no problem, as long as you didn't have a blight or whatever, and you lived off of whatever greens grew around you, plus, whatever meat you chose to eat at whatever time, or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But they could the Greeks could live off of just the vegetables that grow in the mountain and olives in lamb milk and never have to slaughter anything or eggs.
Yeah.
Okay? Because that's what supported the people. The olive tree, it provides a tremendous amount of food that's easily storable.
Yes.
Okay? In Adelaide, what grows there that's really storable? There's no peanut trees, really. There's no, olive trees. Well, I know there's olive trees in Australia.
We obviously now we actually grow a lot of vineyards and wines, but there used to be a lot of nuts, like almonds.
Okay, so it has switched.
Yeah, we're actually very Mediterranean climate here. It's well known for it being exactly like Italy and Greece, So
that's why so many have moved there.
Yeah, a lot of immigrants. Like Melbourne, like Debbie was talking about it, but it's got the biggest Greek population outside of Greece, I think, in the world.
Yeah.
So
there's more in Melbourne than there is in Greece.
Yeah, so you're talking all the procured meats and stuff. Adelaide's got a lot of that wisdom, sort of the Italians and the Greeks, like that.
I watched a cooking show that talked all about Australia, how the Mediterranean had gone over there. And that was one of the shows that had mentioned the Greek population. I knew that from my dad. There's only 11 million Greeks in Greece right now. That's the country, 8. Yeah. But there's 45 million Greeks abroad. That's how much left that country since World War II.
Yeah, a massive, millions would be here.
Yeah, and you've got a Greek population of 7 million in all of Australia, and 2/3 of that's in Melbourne.
Wow.
Yeah. But the thing is, the beauty of being we're truly a multicultural immigrant sort of population. There's obviously a few generations in now, but say you're talking about the 1900s and stuff. We got a lot of Germans as well. So they got the meats as well in their own way. These cultures, a common theme is they've got these meats that are enduring sort of preservative sort of
right. Their recipes traveled worldwide because of flavor, ability to prepare, and how storable it was.
Yeah, delicacies, and
right, delicacy. Yeah.
So
that's right.
We've actually got this area called Harndorf, and it's in the hills, and then it's very German architecture and stuff. And so they've got a lot of German orientated sort of expressions in food, the farming and all that. So Adelaide's this drought floodplain, but our Adelaide hills are actually quite lush and very conducive to growing vegetables and stuff. There's a lot of spring water and high quality water and that. So even though it's quite dry, it's very farmable, very, very good quality. So it's they worked out Adelaide well relative to survivability despite the elements here and stuff. So, but we actually obviously, because we're got oceans, the fish here are really well known.
Yeah, you get so much fishing right there. Yeah.
So Greek and Italians did well as well with that.
The Mediterranean fish. The other thing is, what brought those people there was the whaling industry, believe it or not.
Hey, yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Okay? Got to realize the generation before that, why did they leave? The whaling industry was going through the roof there, and they needed people to service all the employees that were on the whaling boats.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because we actually get like humpback whale and like that sort of whale that breeds south of my city. Yeah, like near where I get the womb shark breeds.
Yeah.
Like they come and they carve up there like during the cold winter, like taken away from the Arctic, and then they go back down this time of year. So yeah.
Yep. And you can imagine what it was like back then. Whaling worldwide, there could be as many as, ungodly amounts, 8 million boats out there.
Well, my mother talks about her father, like my grandfather was like 190, early 90s. So he was born like 1890, something like that. And they talk about how their generation, like, they had uncles that were whalers and stuff like that. So
it had its own culture.
Absolutely.
They would go out 10 months a year, make a boatload of money, give it to their family, and go back out. 10 months a year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, they actually south of my, like an hour or so south, they actually did a lot of the slaughtering of the whales, and over in Western Australia as well. And I remember, like, one of my stories my mum told was that it would take them a week to adjust to the horrible stench.
Yep.
Like, they would be vomiting for a week to get adjusted to it after having a break. That's how bad it putrid it smelled.
Wow.
Because they would boil the blubber to get the oil and stuff,
And then boil the blubber.
Yeah. But absolutely, oil, like whale oil, was such a it was before because I did that oil recording that you talked about, and how oil sort of came into the world. But before that, whales were the tool. But
it was either something called naphtha or whale oil.
Yeah.
They could process.
You bringing that up is like just a reminder how like vast our society has changed, because absolutely whaling was a fundamental to the progress of the time,
The whaling was what? How many thousand year? At least 1,000-year industry. But it doesn't matter. They did whaling whenever they came to the shore. They would just drag the whales back to the shore to boil the blubber off.
Yeah.
Once they figured out how to get a furnace on a boat, they hunted whales.
Yeah.
Which wasn't that hard to get a furnace on a boat.
No. But again, it's such a lost fragment of our civilization that just people don't really contemplate,
Example of off-world gene selection processing. They didn't want the species here. Invade these species. We don't want it in the DNA. Kill it. Use it to light your house because we're not giving you electricity.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, look at that. You're agreeing to burn the blood flesh of a true love being. Well, look at that. Tacit consent.
Wow, yeah.
That's what those fake higher density God beings think that they can do when they get you to burn whale blubber. Yeah, but I look at it a neutral perspective from an understanding that was their goal. Well, their goal is over now. They aren't winning. can't win in non-competition.
You know what I found was interesting, and I get them mixed up, so I'm not too sure which one is which, but it's either the fig tree that pulls energy from you, and it's the olive tree that gives energy to you. And
it's the olive that gives, I believe.
Because one of the trees is like in Greece, and I didn't believe this till I saw pictures from like Strato's father, who showed me these pictures that they have up next to the trees, and the elderly or children are not allowed to stay under these trees because they literally pull the energy from them, and especially for the elderly.
Yes, because there are certain trees that were planted there on purpose to hold back time-traveling frequencies.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Because there were damages and rifts to the reality, so they were able to plant trees that had spiritual contracts with angelic beings to heal a rift in an area.
Wow.
Sometimes they didn't have the availability of technology, just had to put a god being in a seed and please hold the rift shut. Please, for 1,000 years, please.
There's another Andrew Whal moment.
Yeah, then we'll make sure the people venerate you.
Please hold it shut. How many generations later do they forget that wisdom?
Pretty fast.
Yeah. But the tree does an amazing job, and the people like appreciate it, but then they forget it because they're in comfort.
And then you just end up a superstition or a myth in the next generations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was telling you before about whaling. That's what brought a lot of the immigrants there. The other thing that brought the immigrants there was the mining.
Yeah. Yeah. Copper mining.
Oh. So wherever there was a bunch of people from one area, they brought their food with them. Eventually, they brought whatever cook they could over. And then they'd open up their own little restaurants.
Yeah. And it's
then they wouldn't have food.
It's like what you said about, I forget where it was, but you talk about, it's in one of the stream reads that I did, like before I started up with you, I did an hour stream read, and you talk about the peasant food becomes a cultural thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like over generations. And it's interesting you say this because we were talking, I don't know if you were there, Mandy, but we were talking about all the truckers in America, how these enormous trucking companies have hundreds of thousands of trucks on their register and drivers and stuff, and Andrew was talking about how a lot of them, the drivers, are becoming like Pakistani or Indian, and what's happening is that there's whole truck locations for these truck drivers throughout America to have all their like ancestral sort of like foods for truck stops now.
Are serving Indian food everywhere.
Yeah.
Basically, a lot of those guys were some form of limited small truck driver in Pakistan or taxi drivers that said, I can drive truck in America. So I was telling you about whaling and mining. Now, when Australia was getting its big population boom, it had completed its railroads, I think it was the late 1870s. I'm going to look it up, actually. This actually has a point. It finished at the same time as the Congo Railroad. History, wow.
If you want a good, not of our reality, but in New York about the 1900s, there's a show called The Nick, and they're very good at showing the authenticity of the day, like how different things were accepted that would never be accepted today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very like time encapsulated of what went on then. Very good. But the railroad's 1870.
1856. So 1856 is where New South Wales to Victoria.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the United States, and the Congo finished it. The United States finished its north, south, east, west, and all direction railroads by the 1860s. So the Congo Railroad and the Australian Railroad and the final connection of the American Railroad and the Europeans was much easier because it's much smaller territory, signified the brand new grid of wood and metal. It was the brand new sacred geometry imprint. And that was an intention from 100 years previous to get enough miners in the right area so that they could build up a tremendous plethora of raw material that was just sitting there in big piles for the next generations.
Yeah, in Australia, there was like a gold rush, and in the US, there was a gold rush as well.
Mm-hmm. Gold, well, copper and silver and zinc.
But the gold rush was the draw card for a lot of migrants.
Yeah, but most of them never actually got gold. They ended up in the copper and the silver mines because they didn't know how to pan for gold.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah. And it was a lure, it was a hook. It was like that gold rush energy was like,
right,
strike it rich, so I'm going to go because there's nothing here,
Wow.
The one interesting thing about the train lines is that Australia only in the last 15 years had Adelaide to Darwin, so the north-south line done that goes through the centre of Australia, that was only just completed in the last 15 years.
Wow. I wonder why it was for so long.
I mean, it's 3,000 miles of desert, but
okay.
But it's more like obviously to grid Australia on a different level. There's definitely that, but it's the mining boom that we went through. It was a bit
right.
of again, it was a mining boom with the China and stuff, but it was just a massive infrastructure thing for Australia to have. And then what they've done is that they've actually based a lot of our military here in Adelaide because the train lines intersect here that go over to the west from the east, and then from here to the north as well. So it's
as well as the fact that it's a port.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now that I've set up for what I'm trying to say, what do you think the other industry was that when you had the other industry that attracted other groups of people to come and bring their culture there? So you had the food come there. What else came along with them?
Obviously families and family crests.
Correct. That's the esoteric stuff, right? It's the esoteric stuff.
Because there was opportunity then and there was establishment. But you're talking business. Mm-hmm. Well, obviously Australia does a lot of farming.
Right. Farming.
Yeah.
The agriculture.
Like the raw products, like the first,
right.
Yeah, primary produce sort of stuff.
Okay. So what they did is they many nation states would authorize a scam to make it seem like you can get 4% of a local county to suddenly just get up and move to somewhere. And they would be state-sponsored scams, so as soon as you got on the boat and got off there, everything you thought was going to be happening didn't happen.
Yeah.
Right. So you were just dropped off there, and poof, nothing. So this was worldwide that happened.
Yeah.
So they brought their farming techniques. which also made a basic labor to go in the mines right away. Okay. The other thing is there was always salt mining, and usually it was the prisoners that did salt mining. Okay. Because salt mining was, you die really fast in the salt mines, worse than the coal mines.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That. So.
But yeah, like this region is very rich with sort of copper. A lot of, like a lot of the cities and towns are along the coast of, say, from here over to the west. There's a lot of like mining towns. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And those mining towns, then supported, their own local exchange system, whether it was package exchange, telegraph, telephone eventually. But those communities all had to locally support each other. Yeah. So it was the agricultural communities that allowed cities to spawn up.
Yeah.
That's why they needed all the farmers everywhere they could do. And the same thing in the United States. They needed all the farmers from Ireland and in Italy and all the upper mountains that they were evicting.
So what you're talking is like it was a
cultural redistribution. Yes.
Multi-generational sort of industrialization establishment to prepare for the big city sort of stuff.
Yes.
They had to have the resources to support the structure in place to allow it to happen. Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
So now there's one more layer. You were talking about it before. Their esoteric systems that they brought with them. So the railroads themselves were their own ritual, and then the people that would come and work under a family crest and said places would be the ones sharing the debt of the family karma, because as soon as they become part of the debtor institution, because that's generally what happened, as soon as you got dropped off there, you became indebted to someone else. They feed you and give you a job or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so once you're in the debtor scenario, you took on the negative karma of the whole crest.
Yeah.
So.
Because like a consistent thing with this was the elimination of the indigenous.
Yep.
The we talked about the oral traditionalists being wiped out and stuff, but also the cultures that caretook the land were exterminated en masse.
Right. Right.
To eliminate that harmonious sort of expression for the disunity unity reality establishment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then they would, import certain types of plants that would overgrow other native plants. The farmers. They would bring the seedlings and stuff that they want because they knew what they could eat. Yeah. Oftentimes they would bring in very invasive species. That stuff was, intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not to mention things like foxes and rabbits here, because they're plague proportions and really destroyed the balance.
Well, was it the great bunny rabbit plague of the 1880s or something like that, where somebody they began to install rabbits, but they just took over the whole country?
Yeah, many times, mate. Like there's been many attempts to cull the rabbits just for the plague proportions, because there's no predators in our sort of thing. They compete with the natives, and the natives aren't like competitive. They're just so
there's nothing
like,
that
even the train, all right, the train from South Australia to North Australia is called the Gan, in relation to the camels that brought over by the Afghans. It's like short for Afghanistan, like the Gan train, because camels were very like prevalent here, just for the inhospitable nature of Australia.
Mm-hmm.
But there's lots of wild camels in Australia as well, which is...
I did not know that. Wild camels in Australia. That's cool as hell. Mandy, have you ever heard of the Great Rabbit Plague before?
No, not at all. I mean, I've I've experienced stuff in just a couple of years ago in New Brunswick where you couldn't hunt rabbits or anything like that anymore because of this infection that they had in between their fur and their skin.
No, this is different. This is rabbits were brought into Australia, and they bred so fast that there were no natural predators that they ate all the foliage and stripped the country dry.
Wow.
So this is really Andre. Kind of fill her in. I'm going to find a website for you. 1 second. You're going to laugh at this, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, thing is, Australia being an island, you know, the ecology here is in such balance and harmony, and obviously there's so many unique species here. It's like quite isolated. But what that meant was when colonization happened, like from the 1770s, that a lot of the regional things that people had, they brought, and quarantining was like there was no such thing, you know. It was like there was no concept of quarantine, you know. It was just like we come in, and for many reasons, you know, there's layers because it was to actually destroy the land and all that sort of stuff. But like so many times, like say a weed or a plant or an animal, they brought rabbits to hunt to give the foxes something to hunt, you know, because the aristocrats wanted to hunt foxes here, you know. And then foxes went and destroyed all the marsupials, you know, like the natives. And like things like cats and dogs, like they're all feral in certain parts of Australia, that they're all fenced off and things like that, you know. And rabbits, yeah, like the conditions here and the vastness and all the, you know, it's phenomenal. Like they actually release like viruses every now and again that they develop to cull the rabbits, but rabbits are just like so impressive in their endurability and survivability that they you know, there's a thing called myxomatosis that was released not long ago, like maybe the last 30 or 40 years. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was like, so it would wipe out 90 or 95% of the population, but that 5% just regrow. You know?
Right.
Wow.
Rabbits could be born pregnant.
What?
Yes. They could breed twice in a year. That's how survivable they are. Imagine breeding twice in a year, litter a year, and they could have 4 to 15 in a litter.
Wow.
Yeah. Born pregnant. Imagine that.
Yeah, like how does that happen?
Ready to go.
Yeah. Wow.
By 1920,
Wow.
there are thought to be 10 billion rabbits in Australia.
Yeah. So I think it was when the 1850s or 1880s, it got so bad, they started eating all the foliage and really stripped the country dry. So they actually had to go and do something about the rabbit population.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm surprised no smart Australian just started a capture and ground rabbit industry, ground rabbit beef and stew industry.
They probably did. It wasn't enough, you know. That's where the migration started. We need to deal with these rabbits. Let's bring the people, you know.
Yeah, they couldn't get the rest of the world to eat ground rabbit. It's like the whole pigeon thing. Everybody likes pigeon every now and then, but they're not going to buy it regular.
But yeah, it's like
pigeon should have been the new chicken.
Well, there's not really like a hunting culture in Australia, but say farmers will go out rabbit shooting at night, you know. Like we don't have that structure of like regions like hunting being a part, but they would go out and do it at night, sort of thing, you know.
You had to call the population, or literally they could eat your garden in a night.
Wow.
Yeah, the garden that was supposed to feed you all summer long.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're
Imagine-
cute.
Yeah, imagine 200 rabbits, suddenly descending upon your garden.
Yeah, but I mean, you think about in this era when it was so hard to there was no food preparation and stuff like that. The impact on a society was pretty devastating,
Mm-hmm.
Like you lose a crop for a year, it's like, how do you survive,
Mm-hmm. You leave. You go where the food is.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that, really, very vastly different from what we have the luxuries of today,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but interesting what you're saying about Australia, like the railroads and stuff, and setting up the patterns relative to the geometry of cities, like the sacred geometry structures.
Mm-hmm.
So the railway lines were a big part of it. Because I made that comment to you about how there was an effort to also suppress the railway, the inland infrastructure as well. Because the maritime admiralty law sort of thing, many of the large continents, there was an actual, on some level, an effort to prevent connections as well,
No, it's because there were still active hollow earth portals in the center, in the inlands of Australia that the off-worlders were using, and they told the industrialized infrastructure, we're using those areas for the next 100 years, don't populate it with railroads.
Okay.
What?
Don't come with your horse and wagon in our place,
Keep your settlers somewhere else. All that settling, that was all directed. All that was all directed. As I told you, state-sponsored scams.
Yeah.
Wow.
Irish, the Italians, the Germans, the French, they all came to America under a fake dream. Oftentimes their ticket was paid for them by the state. And they had no support when they got off.
Yeah.
A lot of times they didn't even have paperwork because they didn't have paperwork then.
Yeah.